Welcome to the Great Luchak Show, everybody. This is episode 6, and today, as I said last week, we're going to be talking about how I did it, my first multi-unit deal. Was it a flip? You'll find out by the end of the show. But we're going to talk a little bit about real estate, and we're going to talk, so I have some talking points. We're going to be talking about the process, strategy, of course, the 1 in a million deal that I did, and what I learned from that deal. So let's jump right into it. First, let's start by stating that investing in real estate is a process. It's important that you need to know that you need to read, study, and investigate. And what I tell people, if you really want to learn about real estate investing, you just got to jump in. That doesn't mean you go out and just buy the first property you come to. Get out and start looking at deals. Okay? It's free to look at deals. Look in your own backyard, look in your city, look in your own region. But don't bug real estate agents. You can friend a few, obviously. You want to get to know a few of them. And real estate agents, they could be buyer agents or seller agents. Whenever you're looking at deals, you want to have a buyer agent. You may want to have to sign an exclusive agreement with them. That's fine. But, research your agents. You want to know that they know the market that you're looking at. And that could be from neighborhood to neighborhood, even. It could be even from what type of investing you are. Are you buying a single family home? Are you buying multi-unit commercial? It depends on what you're buying. Some agents actually specialize. So you want to research your real estate market, research your real estate agents, okay? But don't bug them. You want to friend a few. They're a great source and resource for information. But when you're actually going out just looking for deals, look on your own. You may call them and maybe ask a couple questions, but you don't want to inundate them. You don't want to waste their time. When you're ready to buy, get your agent involved, and then start taking a serious look and making some offers. But it's free to look, people. Get out there and just start looking at deals and understanding your own market. That's what I had to do when I first started way back in my early 20s. Another thing you should remember is that the reason you don't want to use the same agent as the buyer and the seller, because there is a potential conflict of interest. And that same thing applies for lawyers. There is a definite conflict of interest. Never use the same lawyer on a deal. You have your own lawyer, the seller has their own lawyer, or vice versa, depending on what position you're in, if you're buying or selling. Always use your own lawyer. That way he can represent you. It's very important to know that, because there would be a conflict of interest. Having said that, get in the game. Start looking at deals like FSBOs, which is for sale by owners. It used to be called Grapevine. Today they call it Purple Bricks. Look at real estate listings on the internet, on Kijiji, wherever there's listings that you can look at. And the other thing is, get out and drive around. Look directly in your own market, because often you'll find a deal that's not listed, it's not with an agent, and if you know what you're looking for, you can get there before anybody else does. So it's very, very important to drive around and talk to people. You want to figure out and based on that, you want to figure out what kind of investor you're going to be. I don't know if you have money or not. Most people try and get into this game and they don't have any money. So then it depends on your strategies. We'll talk about strategies in a few moments. For me, the process of buying my first deal meant looking at many deals. And that's what I'm telling you to do. Get out and research your market. When I first got started in my early 20s, I was living up in Virginia Town. We call it V-Town, which is right on the border of Quebec and Ontario. It was about 8 hours from Ottawa, to give you an idea. About a couple hours from Timmins. So it was fairly far away, but it's a very small mining town. At the time when I was there, about 1,000 people. In its heyday, about 5,000 people. I looked at property there. I even met a few people that owned property there. But I knew the town was, it was on its last legs. It was dying. In fact, I worked there for 4 years. I ended up moving away to Elliott Lake. So I looked in Virginia Town. I also looked in areas that were near Virginia Town, like Kirkland Lake, which is about 20,000 people. But I couldn't find any properties that enticed me or that I thought the numbers were going to work. So when I moved to Elliott Lake. There were a number of properties there that I liked. But again, when I checked that market out, Elliott Lake had crashed like 3 times in the past. Today, the mines, a year after I left there, actually all the mines closed, and it's now a retirement community. So while I was researching and driving around, I also drove as far away as Sault Ste. Marie. And I found a few properties there, but I thought, well, it was a little far for me to maybe manage that for my early investing. And then I thought, well, I'll go to Sudbury, which was about an hour from Elliott Lake. And I found lots of great deals there. I ended up buying one at the end, and we'll get into that in a minute. But literally, I drove thousands of kilometers over 3 years to find my first deal. And why? Because back in the day, you've probably heard that, there was no internet. You had to rely on newspaper listings and legwork, footwork. You had to get out there and look. So I drove and drove and drove, and it took me 3 years to find my first deal that I could actually buy. And I had tried to buy a few, but the third one was the charm. But that was after looking at, and I can't even remember how many deals I looked at over 3 years. I looked at many, many, many deals, always assessing the numbers. So like I said, I went through this process, and that's what you need to do. You go through this process, get in, start looking at deals, start learning. You want to be a sponge. You'll find that you want to be a reader. I think I mentioned that earlier. You want to read books. I found a book, I think it was like in 1981, 82. Like the first book I found was No Money Down by Robert Allen. I believe that's who wrote it. And that was a good first book for me to read, give me some tips and some pointers, what to think about when I was looking at real estate. I also discovered some home study courses. I don't know if the Hume Publishing is around anymore, but they had some courses. They had a home study course on real estate investing, but I had to go through a money management home study course first, and then a stock investing course first to get to the third one. So I spent a few $100s buying these home study courses, but they gave me some information to work with, gave me somewhere to start from. So it's key to read, because most people, I can tell you, you won't learn how to invest in real estate in high school or secondary, post-secondary, going to college, university. You won't learn it there. The only way you learn it is jumping into the market and figuring it out. Hopefully you find a mentor along the way. That's where I lacked when I started, it's good to have a mentor if you can find one that'll help give you some pointers in getting started. So like I said, you jump in. So study and learn your market. I also attended many seminars over the years, but not before I bought my first multi-unit. That first 3 years was primarily me reading and going directly into the market looking for deals. But eventually I got into going to seminars. Now seminars can be a trap. You have to be very careful, because obviously, if you've heard, they can be expensive. You can end up spending a lot of money on your credit card taking these courses. And I did spend a lot of money over the years, probably about $30,000 taking, I forget how many seminars I went to, quite a few. It added up over time. But I went for a specific reason. I went to meet other investors, hopefully to connect with other like-minded people, that maybe I could find people that I could either partner with or joint partner with, or creating my list of people that I could possibly sell a deal to. There's all kinds of aspects to the real estate market you can get into. So networking is a good thing to do, and obviously going to these seminars is a good place to start. But be careful not to get sucked into something that you can't afford. And it's not a good idea to max out your credit card thinking that your first deal is going to pay for that. It almost never works that way. So be very careful how you use your credit and how you use your money in that regard. So I'd also like to talk about, getting started. A lack of money is not a reason, it's an excuse. Most people don't have any money when they get started. So you have to be creative. And then I'm sure you've heard of Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and many other gurus. They tout that debt is the new currency. Well, the fact is, debt has been the new currency since the early 70s, when gold stopped being the standard for backing currency. Today, it's debt that backs currency, and so it's been around for like 50 years. Debt has been the new currency. And what do they mean by that? It means that, let's take two examples. The real estate market. The real estate market is built on debt, which means you're going to go out and you're going to leverage, and you're going to borrow to invest in real estate. And then if you say, for example, the stock market, which is a completely different animal, completely different game, you're going to invest in equities with cash. Okay? So it's two different aspects of investing, but two totally different games. Both require knowledge to get involved. So, when you start out with the real estate market, your knowledge is going to be coming by getting into the trenches, getting out, looking at deals, studying, analyzing, and reading. And realize that real estate investing is all about management. You're going to have to learn about financing. You're going to have to learn about managing property, about renovating and maintaining property. It's management and knowledge. It's stuff that you'll have to. It's like on-the-job training because, like I said, there's no courses. You can go and take a course, become a real estate agent, which that's one side of the real estate game, but it's not the investment side. Okay, you'll learn. If you're a real estate agent, you're going to learn about contracts. It's also very important to know, as a business owner, as an investor, you need to know and understand contracts. There's basically four things, I guess. You need to understand contracts. You need to understand leverage. You need to understand management, and you have to absolutely understand cash flow. Very important, because that's the difference when you're dealing with debt. And people they advocate, like Robert Kiyosaki and many other gurus, talk about debt being the new currency. You have to understand that's based on cash flow. You can't leverage a deal to the point where it doesn't make any money, or the potential for losing is so great that you can 100% leverage a deal. And I'll talk about that when we get into my 1 in a million deal, because I did 100% leverage the deal, but it cash flowed, and it cash flowed well. And that's the key point. There's many people that get into the real estate game and they over leverage their property and they're not making it, they're actually losing. And that's the wrong way to get started. That's when you get into trouble. So understanding those four key things, four, not five, four, is very good thing to know. Understand that leverage in a deal is not the actual goal. The goal should be cash flow and wealth creation. So understand that getting involved in real estate is a game, it's a process. In a future episode, I will also be talking about different aspects of the real estate game, like building a power team, and we'll talk about finance and strategy. I'm going to touch a little bit about strategy in a moment, but those are for future episodes. So let's keep going on this particular episode. Let's talk strategy. Buying real estate, I've learned over the years, has 5 basic strategies. You can rehab and flip, and you see a lot of that on TV, HGTV, some of these other networks now, DIY network. They all talk, they all flipping. Everybody in the home flipping and renovating. That's really what you see a lot of on TV. So there's rehab and flipping. There's a rehab and hold, which means you can buy a property, rehab it to improve its value, and then hold it long term. That's a great strategy too. There's simply just buy and hold. Maybe you'll find a property that already is in good shape and you just want to buy and hold it. Then there's wholesaling and lease option. So those are the 5 basic strategies. There's ultimately holding real estate is what creates wealth, but based on those 5 strategies, there are umpteen ways to make a deal. So we're not talking the 5 basic strategies, but there's umpteen ways to make a deal. So understand that buying and holding real estate is based on debt and cash flow, as I talked about in the process. So you might want to be asking, why did I start with a multi-unit? When I started looking at deals and studying the numbers, the market was much different today than it was back then. Today, for a lot of markets, and not every market's the same, but for a lot of markets, vacancy rates are very low because there's more people renting today as opposed to more people buying today because of the economy. Also, our buying power, our purchasing power today is 3 to 4 times less than it was 30, 40 years ago. There's a huge difference in our purchasing power today. It's getting harder and harder to do things. So these are all things to take into account. When I was thinking of multi-unit, there were higher vacancy rates. When I looked at the single family home game, I thought, the cost per unit, it was too high, that I thought, and even today it's still too high. But getting rents that, if you lose a month because it's vacant, then you're out of pocket. Whereas a multi-unit, depending in a multi-unit commercial deal is any 5 units and above. 4 units and less is not considered commercial. Although 4 units and triplexes can be really good investments, but commercial multi-unit deals are usually 5 units and above. So typically, if you miss a tenant and there's a 1-month gap, it's not going to hurt you that much because you still have revenue coming in that should cover your expenses. So I started my investing career thinking long term. I didn't go into real estate thinking that I was going to be flipping property. That kind of happened on its own. I originally thought my original game plan was to be a long-term investor. I was going to buy and hold because that's how you create wealth in real estate. So I went into my deal thinking, okay, I'm looking for multi-unit deals and I'm thinking of buying and holding for a long term. So flipping wasn't my first thought, although ultimately it's where I spent most of my career in real estate, was flipping property. As I said earlier, I spent a great deal of time driving around over a 3-year period. I looked at many properties, and by the end I had made several deals. So let's get into the one in a million deal that I was telling about. That's what the purpose of this video. I found a deal, and this I was, like I talked about earlier, I traveled around V-Town, I looked in Kirkland Lake, I looked in Elliott Lake, I looked in Sault Ste. Marie. I even looked at a few properties back in Ottawa, but I wasn't living there. But ultimately, I ended up looking in Sudbury, which was about a little over an hour drive from where I was living. So it was within my region. And there were lots of the numbers. Sudbury was like of course, it's a mining town, but buying real estate there was like buying gold mines, because they were typically cash cows, which means that they made a lot of money and weren't very expensive to buy at the time. So it was a really good market. It was a hot market for that. So it was hard to find a deal that wasn't snatched up before you got to it. And I looked at many deals there. I ultimately made 3 offers on looked at 3 different properties and had 3 offers. My first building that I offered on was a 7-unit deal that I believe it was like early spring of '85. And I looked at that deal. It was a $130,000 deal. It made about $30,000 a month gross, $30,000 a year gross. It was what I call a Class D building, which means it was over 40 years old. And but we discovered in that deal, at least my lawyer did, because when you do your contract, your lawyer has a certain amount of time to research the property and look at title and look at things at the city, like all that. He discovered that they had done illegal renovations. Now, when I looked at the deal, it was a 7-unit. There were 7 apartments, but this picture, because I don't have a picture of it here, but this picture, it's a corner lot with a building on it in a residential area where the first floor used to be a convenience store, and there were apartments above. So it was essentially, and I believe it was 4 units above. It may have been 3, but it ultimately was a 7-unit when I was buying it. But what the owner had done, because he couldn't keep the convenience store rented, he decided to sever it up into a couple of apartments, but he didn't get a permit. So he was trying to sell the building as a 7-unit, but it was basically an illegal 7-unit. So when he discovered that, he told me, listen, this is your first real estate investment of this size. You may want to consider not doing it, because you could be caught on the hook. If the city ever found out that these things were done and you own it, you'd be on the hook for it, which either they would make you demolish what you had, or they would make you go through the application process, and if you didn't follow the building, could be just a huge can of worms. So he said, you have the right to walk away, because they never disclosed it. So we decided, I took his advice, I walked away from that deal a week before closing. In fact, I think it was even closer to the closing date than that, but it was very close to the closing date, and we walked, and we were able to do that because we did it right. We had the right offer with the right clauses. And that's usually, when you're using a real estate agent, most of their agreements have all the right clauses as far as that stuff goes in it. But that's another thing you want to research and understand, is contracts and real estate contracts and how they're written. So that was the first deal that I missed out on. Well, I deliberately walked away from it. And then shortly after that, early summer, this is summer of '85, I believe it was June of '85, my agent and I came across a building for sale. It was a 10-unit. Only 10 years old, all concrete, had an elevator, really good shape, $245,000 with like a $40,000 plus income. Still really good numbers. And I really liked it, and I told her, I said, well, we should go in, we'll make an offer. I went and looked at the building. The building was spectacular. So let's make an offer. I want to go in full offer. She said, no, I think we should lowball this one. So I took her advice, but it turned out that there ended up being multiple offers, and we were not the top offer. I don't think we were at the bottom necessarily, but the owner took the best offer, which happened to be a full price offer, and I lost out on this building. It was spectacular. It wasn't so much that the numbers on the building I ended up buying were better. but the building itself was much better. It was only 10 years old. What we would call like a Class B building. Okay, all concrete. It was like a really good long-term purchase. But I ended up losing out on that one. And then a few weeks later, because my agent had her ear to the ground. Now let me tell you a little bit about my agent. Her name was Rita Stortini. And I was like 26 years old, 25 years old, like 26, my mid-20s. And she was in her late 60s. She was kind of at the end of her career. And I was a sponge. I was just trying to learn as much as I could from her. So, and she was really, because she knew I was a go-getter, because we had been chasing properties. I think I dealt with her for close to a year. I was running back and forth from Sudbury or on the phone with her, constantly analyzing deals. When she heard about this deal, she kept putting feelers out. Because I was so young, I often heard the comment, "Oh, who's this kid? He can't be for real." Because I was young and I was looking at multi-unit buildings. And she said, "He's for real. He has some money." And, she said to take him seriously. So she came across this deal the night or the day before it was to be listed. And this is the one in a million deal that I was talking about. It was a 12-unit, all brick, what I would call a Class D building, which means it was over 40 years old, but it was well maintained and in really good shape. The owner actually lived in the building. Now the owner, he was, like I said, he was an older guy in his late 60s at the time. He owned a number of buildings. I think he had 3 or 4 multi-unit buildings, but he was looking to retire. He wanted to downsize. He didn't want to be managing as much. He didn't, so his idea was to get rid of this building, pocket some cash, and live in one of his other buildings, and simply he was looking to retire. So she said, "I have an idea." And then I had never heard it because I didn't know a whole lot about the real estate market or financing. She says, "We're going to structure the offer with a vendor take-back." And I said, "Okay, well, what's a vendor take-back?" That's what some people refer to as seller's mortgage. And what you'll learn, and what I'll tell you here, is that if you're looking for the perfect private lender, is a vendor take-back. And the reason why is because you'll instantly because they never check, so you won't have to go through a qualification process. So that's easy. There's never any fees involved. It makes the deal simple. Okay, and it's a good strategy when you're trying to negotiate with somebody who's looking to retire. So I was learning this. I didn't know how to do that. I was learning how to do that on my first. Well, it was not exactly the first deal, but the first deal I ended up closing on was like the ultimate one in a million deal with the perfect strategy. So we went in there. It was, like I said, a 12-unit building. Let me just scroll down here because I want to stay on track of my numbers here. So it was a 12-unit building, 3-story brick Class D building, 40 years plus, like I said, $172,500 with roughly a $40,000, just a little over $40,000 income. Had a great, what we would call today, a walking score, because it was very close to downtown. It was very close to to Laurentian University. You got a little bit of it at Sudbury. At that time, it was about 90,000 people. It was considered the gateway to the north. So even though it was a mining town, nickel being the biggest thing, there's lots of things they mine there. But it was also a major university that was there. They had made the Science North Museum. There was all these things that were there. So it was a good place to be investing. That's why it was such a hot market. So $172,500, $40,000 income, pretty spectacular when you think about the numbers, and we'll get into the numbers in a minute. So my agent wrote the deal. It was $172,500, like I said, now here's how we structured it. A 75% vendor take-back mortgage at 12%, amortized over 25 years with no penalties, which is a key thing to know, because if you ever wanted to get out of a mortgage without a penalty, it was an open term would be what it would be called today, with $1,000 down and $49,000 at closing. So it was a very clean offer, and he accepted it instantly, which was awesome. So you're wondering, well, how did I do that? Well, 8 months previous to me doing this deal, I bought another property. Now, I'm going to talk about this, what I did, because what I did is I leveraged one property, pulled some money out of it to use as the down payment. This is where I 100% financed my multi-unit deal. I basically leveraged another property, pulled some money out so that I could use it to purchase the multi-unit. Okay? So as you get started, when you start to escalate up your business, when you start to get your business to grow, you're going to end up doing that in some situations, some deals. That's how I started. Now, how did I do that? I made pretty good money when I was working in the mining industry, but I didn't have $50,000, $60,000 in the bank. So I had, how was I going to creatively finance this deal or any deal? Because I was thinking when I did this, I wasn't sure which deal I was going to get at the time. So I approached family, which a lot of people do. My caveat there is you have to be very careful when you approach family to get involved. And that's what I did. And there's pros and cons to it. In my case, it ended up that the cons were a little greater than the pros. But we went ahead and we made a deal with my family, basically with my parents. My parents at the time had a house in Ottawa that had some value, and it had, market value, but they had a significant amount of equity, enough equity that we could do something with. And what I originally wanted to do was partner with them, create a partnership, and they could use a portion of their equity, invest in the partnership, and go that way. Problem is, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to have anything to do with being involved in a business. They liked the idea of making some money. They were a little nervous about it, but they said, and we had a big family meeting about it. And everybody, we discussed it, and we all thought, there are opportunities out there today. So they said, sure, we'll do it. So I made a deal with my parents. Now, because we didn't do the partnership thing, what they did is they transferred ownership of their home. And the deal was, and this is how I structured the deal, I would pay off their mortgage, which wasn't a lot left on it, but I paid off their mortgage and I paid their expenses for the term of the deal. And this term of this deal ended up being 5 years. So I paid the property taxes, property insurance, heat, hydro, the only thing they had to worry about over that 5-year period was groceries and gas in the car, because I paid for everything else. So I didn't get the building for free. I basically paid for it over time. So that was the deal. So which allowed me to use the equity in the property that I could leverage out. So I leveraged that property, pulling out enough cash. And then when you do that, when you pull out money on a building or on a property, an asset that produces it, when you pull it out for investment purposes, it becomes tax deductible. It becomes a part of the business expense. So I was able to leverage that property, used it for the down payment on the apartment building. So I 100% leveraged the apartment building. So I had when you look at rate of return, ROI, I had no money in it. I leveraged everything. I leveraged the cost of transferring my parents' property into my name so that we could use it for investment purposes. I leveraged the whole deal. So my return on investment was exponential because I had no money in the deal. They didn't even have any money in the deal. It was simply a transfer. So that deal worked. Now, the caveat to that is doing deals with family has a risk factor. Now, it turned out in the long run became risky because I did some things and they did some things, and the partnership didn't work out very well in the long run. But here's the caveat to that as well, is that when you're dealing with family, you have to make sure we had everything as a verbal contract, which is okay, but it shouldn't have been done that way. We should have had actual contracts. Like, we used lawyers. Everything was done with a lawyer. In fact, they had a lawyer and I had a lawyer. That was all done that way. But you should really structure the deal. My original idea was to do an actual partnership agreement where we had an actual business partnership set up, but that's not what we technically did. But that's what you really have to think about how you're going to deal with family. But that's how I was able to do this first deal. And the numbers were spectacular. Let's look at the numbers. Now, remember, I was telling you cash flow, when you're dealing with debt, investing in real estate is all about debt, and cash flow is king. If you can't cash flow or figure out how to cash flow, because apart from rent rolls, money you're bringing in from the rent, there are ways to create cash flow on a property that don't include just rent. But cash flow is king. So the revenue from your investment property must cash flow after all expenses and financing from all sources, which is what I did. So here, the revenue on the building was actually $42,000 to $40,000, and the total expenses were $14,730. The mortgages were $24,768 because I had 2 mortgages going. My net cash flow based on that was $2,500, a little over €2,500, about a little over $200 a month. So there was, and think about back then, it was a 12 unit. I had a couple of units, they were batch units, that were actually less than $200 a month. So it's very feasible. It was still a decent cash flow. Now, apart from that, because I bought this building, like the previous owner did a good deal managing it, but like any building, tenants move out, leases come due. Part of the deal when I bought it, like when you buy a multi-unit or any rental unit, any deposits that are on the units from, you get all those as part of your purchase, and they get accounted for in the transaction. So I had received, that was also part of the deal. You know, I received rents deposits that was deducted from the net cash flow, all that kind of thing, or from the debt deposit. But because it's over the first 6 months, I was able to increase the income from $42,000 to $44,000, which raised the value of the building, because I was able to raise rents legally where, you know, it was, say a tenant, it was their term of their lease was up, I would renegotiate the lease. It would take whatever it was, 2 or 3% or whatever it was. I forget exactly what it was, but I was able to raise a few rents, and then a few tenants vacated, and I got new tenants in. Because it was close to the university, I would say half the building was university students, the other half was either retirees or a couple of working people, that kind of thing. But I was able to raise the rents, $2,000, so that increased the value of the building. It also gave me an extra $166 a month in net cash flow. So my cash flow went from roughly $200 a month to $370 a month. Not quite, almost doubling my cash flow in the first 6 months. Now, next thing I did is I actually refied the building. Because I knew that the building had gone up in value, I refinanced. Now, my deal with the owner, he wasn't too happy about that. But I started to get loose focus on what my original, and this is the learning curve of this deal. You'll get to the end of this. What I learned from this deal, first thing I learned is I never should have sold it, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I got a little bit mesmerized by the amount of money I could make short term. I wasn't thinking long term. I got distracted from that. And I thought, okay, so it's worth $200,000. I can refi. I ended up pulling out $20,000 net. I kind of pulled out almost half of what I put into it that I actually borrowed. Well, maybe about a third from what I had borrowed. So then I decided a little later, after I gotten some advice, now I'll get into this in a second, when I decided to sell the property, my dad approached me, and I was traveling back and forth about every 3 or 4 months, because by the time I bought the building, shortly after, I was back in Ottawa. So it was like 6 hours away. And he goes, well, you're traveling, you think you should be traveling all that distance all the time? And I was thinking about what he was saying. He says, why don't you sell it and look for something else? And he didn't even think about looking for something else. He said, it's kind of, his idea was that it was too far away. But I was thinking of what it was worth and what I could make selling. I lost track of where I was thinking long term, and I started thinking short term. And then I took the advice of my dad and said, okay, maybe I will sell it. Now, if you heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, he talks about that. Picture this situation where I'm taking the advice of my dad. Well, my dad is my poor dad. It's not like the rich dad scenario where his dad was his poor dad as well, but he listened to his friend's father, who was a rich dad, who was a guy who was successful in business, and he listened to him for advice. I took my father's advice, and it's not my father's fault. He was thinking about what his position was if it was him. And I lost track. I was thinking, okay, I can make some good money here if I flip the building. My original intention was never to flip the building. But I ended up flipping the building, and I ended up selling it 18 months later in 1987 for $215,000. So picture this, I bought and sold this building in a relatively short period of time. 18 months is not a long time. Where I had pulled out, I 100% financed it, pulled out $20,000, which is actually tax-free money. And then I flipped it and sold it. At the end of the day, my net capital gain was just shy of $26,000. Now just think, this was 1987. In today's dollars, $26,000 is roughly about the equivalent to $100,000 today. Spectacular flip when you think about the numbers. but it was probably one of the biggest mistakes I did in my investing career, because I had bought a cash cow, 100% leveraged, with the best financing deal you could get, and I let it go. That building today is worth a little over $1 million, has close to $100,000 revenue stream. You could live off the net income off of that building if that was the only thing you owned. Just based on that alone, let alone the amount of times I could have leveraged that property to buy more. So I lost focus. I took bad advice. And so that's my learning experience. What did I learn? First of all, I learned how to buy a deal, and I learned how to buy a good deal, but then I made the mistake and sold it. And there's times in your life when you're investing, there will always be a deal that you'll want to sell it, or you'll want to buy it, but you always need to know the strategy when you're going in. Are you going to go in long term? Then stick to the long term deal, unless you don't have a choice. I had a choice there, and I didn't stick to my original goal or my original strategy, which was to stay into it long term. And originally I was thinking 10 years. I look back at it now, and that's a deal. I should still own that building today if I was smart enough to do it. Problem is, I was inexperienced, I was young, I was flying by the seat of my pants, made a great investment, and I learned from it, and I hope you learned from what I did. So I hope, like I said, I hope you learned from what I did there, and that's how I did my first deal, and how I bought my first multi-unit and made it a flip. I don't recommend in that situation doing it as a flip. That's the mistake I made. But the big deal for me was that was a great deal, and I hope you enjoyed that experience I just shared with you. So, in closing, I want to talk a little bit, get back to the process, talk about strategy that will do you well. Just look at what I learned from this investment here. Number one is look for owner investors looking to retire. 2, work the numbers, find the money, be creative, get out there and look at deals. That's how you're going to learn. And 3, make an offer, get in the game. And by the way, offers are free. It only costs you when you go to close. So when you do an offer, or when you know you're going to do an offer, always know ahead of time how you're going to finance it. You need to know what strategy you're going to use. First of all, whether you're flipping, whether you're holding long term, how long you're going to hold it long term. Maybe it's going to be a short term. Whatever your strategy is, as far as looking forward with the property, you need to know what it is and stick to it. You also have to know that if you have to have there are 2 sides to the strategy, right? The strategy you're going to use, and then how you're going to exit the deal. So there's your entry strategy and your exit strategy. I had an exit strategy in my deal, but I didn't follow it. And I ended up in the long term becoming a flipper, when I really should have been doing both. So that's obvious from what I just told you. So there's lots of tips and tricks that you'll learn, I hope, from watching my channel. I'll get into some more future deals that I did, and I'm hoping that I can do some showcases on some of your deals maybe, or some other people that I might come across and learn about. And you can come on the show and we'll talk about your investments and things like that. Or if you want to talk about renovating, I've been renovating property all my life. Okay, folks, I'm going to wrap up the show. My next video will be about, it's going to be called Real Property Investors / the Calculator. It's a spreadsheet I wrote a few years back, and it analyzes real estate. You basically can plug in numbers and it'll help you develop your strategy and analyze the property, or whether it's a good investment or not. I'm going to do a video on that, and then there'll be links in the future as to how you can get a hold of that spreadsheet from me. You can also support the show by donating to Christina's Story, a GoFundMe campaign on behalf of my wife. You can buy my books if you've seen links. I wrote a book called The Wealth Principle. You can support the show by buying a copy of The Wealth Principle. Like I said, you want to read books? It's a good start. It's my first book. I hope you like it. You can also, there's a link on the top of my webpage. It's an Amazon link, so if you're thinking of shopping on Amazon, if you click through my link, I'll get a referral fee. These are all ways that you can support the production of the show and help me as I transition home, because that's what I'm doing, to be my wife's caregiver. That's another video that's out there that you can check out. So I'm going to wrap the show up, so I hope you're having a great day, and as always, you keep crushing it.